Sometimes you wake up and realize you feel absolutely nothing. No sadness, no joy, no anger, no hope. It's as if someone turned off the switch of your emotions during the night, and you're just a body walking through the world, going through automatic movements that once made sense. You brush your teeth, drink coffee, answer messages, but inside there's an emptiness so deep it's almost comfortable. It's scary to realize that feeling nothing can be a relief. Franz Kafka once wrote, "There is infinite hope, but not for us." Perhaps this nothingness we feel is exactly the first glimpse of that infinite hope that lies beyond our limited understanding, beyond the desperate need to always feel something. Let's explore together why emotional emptiness, though painful, might be the most honest portal to the awakening of the soul. Imagine for a moment that you're an actor who has performed the same role for years. Every day you wake up and put on the costume of your habitual emotions. Joy when you should be happy, sadness when something goes wrong, anger when you feel wronged. But one day you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the character. The emotions that once came naturally now seem forced, artificial, as if you're trying to press a button that no longer works. This is Anna's experience, a 35-year-old woman who reached out to me after months of feeling what she called absolute nothing. She described feeling like an empty house where many people once lived. The furniture was still there, the routines continued, but there was no longer life pulsing within them. Kafka knew this sensation of disconnection well. In his diaries, he frequently wrote about feeling like a stranger in his own life, as if he were observing his existence from the outside, unable to truly inhabit it. But Kafka also discovered something extraordinary in this experience. When we stop forcing emotions, when we accept the emptiness, we begin to hear whispers from the soul that were previously muffled by the noise of our automatic feelings. The emotional emptiness you're feeling isn't a malfunction of your system. It's a necessary pause, like when a computer needs to be restarted because it's overloaded. Your soul is doing a deep cleaning, removing layers of emotional conditioning that you've carried for years without questioning. Think of your emotions like clothes you wear every day. Some were chosen by you, others were imposed by family, society, expectations of who you should be. Over time, you may have forgotten who you really are underneath all these layers. Emotional numbness is your psyche saying, "Stop, breathe, let's take all this off and see what remains." It's terrifying because it means facing the possibility that maybe there's nothing underneath. But Kafka teaches us that it's exactly in this moment of apparent nothingness that we find our true nature. He wrote, "The path cannot be found by those who seek it, but only by those who have lost themselves." Your sense of emptiness is you losing yourself to find yourself. Carlos has worked in an office for 15 years. Every day he sits in the same chair, looks at the same screen, does the same tasks. One day, in the middle of an important meeting, he simply stopped feeling anything about anything. Not anger at his boss, not frustration with work, not anxiety about deadlines. Just a serene emptiness that scared him more than any intense emotion he'd ever felt. He told me it was like discovering he'd spent years running on a treadmill, believing he was going somewhere when actually he was just moving in the same place. The numbness forced him to stop and look around for the first time. Kafka lived this same experience when he worked at the Insurance Institute. He felt like a machine processing forms, a cog in a system that made no sense to his soul. But it was exactly this alienation that led him to write some of the most profound reflections on the human condition. When you stop feeling superficial emotions, you finally have space to hear the deeper whispers of existence. There's a crucial difference between depression and spiritual emptiness. Depression is a heavy cloud that extinguishes light. Spiritual emptiness is like a clear sky after a storm, vast and silent. In depression, you're still fighting against something. In spiritual emptiness, you've finally stopped fighting. It's a surrender that isn't giving up, but rather a recognition that maybe you've spent too much energy trying to feel the right things, be the right person, have the right reactions. Kafka wrote about this difference when he said, "I am not free, but I am also not a prisoner. I am something that doesn't yet have a name. That something without a name is the space between who you thought you were and who you really are. It's an unexplored territory of the soul that can only be accessed when you stop trying to be someone specific. The emptiness you feel isn't absence of life. It's pure presence, without the filters of your emotional expectations. Society teaches us we should always be feeling something. If we're happy, we should celebrate. If we're sad, we should process. If we're angry, we should express. But nobody teaches us what to do when we simply feel nothing. This state is seen as problematic, as something that needs to be quickly fixed. But what if the nothingness was exactly where you need to be right now? What if it were a state of grace disguised as a problem? Kafka understood this deeply. He saw alienation not as a curse but as an opportunity to see life from a completely different perspective. When you're not emotionally involved with your circumstances, you can observe them with a clarity that was previously impossible. You see the patterns, the repetitions, the automatisms that guided your life without you realizing it. It's like stepping out of a maze and seeing it from above for the first time. You finally understand the shape of what kept you trapped. The emotional emptiness also reveals something profound about the artificial nature of many of our daily emotions. How many times have you felt anger because it was expected that you feel it? How many times have you forced joy in situations where everyone seemed happy? Emotional numbness is like a forced pause in this constant performance. It's your soul saying, "Enough. I won't pretend feelings that aren't genuinely mine anymore." Kafka lived this tension between what was emotionally expected of him and what he actually felt. He wrote letters to his father that were never sent, expressing feelings that society of his time considered inappropriate. His radical emotional honesty, even when that honesty included admitting that sometimes he felt nothing, was what made his work so powerful. When you accept feeling nothing, you're refusing to participate in the emotional theater that society has created, and embracing a form of authenticity that scares most people. There's a specific loneliness that accompanies emotional emptiness, different from any other type of isolation. It's not the loneliness of being physically alone, nor the loneliness of feeling misunderstood. It's the loneliness of having lost the emotional bridge that connected your internal experience with the external world. You can be surrounded by people who love you, in situations that should be meaningful, but everything seems to happen on the other side of thick glass. This loneliness can be desperate, but it can also be deeply liberating. Kafka wrote, "I am free, and that is my misfortune." When you're no longer trapped by automatic emotional reactions, you gain a frightening freedom. The freedom to choose how to respond to life instead of simply reacting. The freedom to not be defined by your moods. The freedom to exist without needing to justify your existence through emotional intensity. People around you may not understand your current state. They may try to fix you with well-intentioned suggestions. Go out more. Do something you enjoy. Think positive. But you know that's not how it works. It's not lack of activities or negative thoughts. It's something much deeper, as if you've discovered that the life you were living wasn't really yours. Roberto, a musician who spent 2 years in a state of emotional emptiness, told me that people constantly suggested he play music to feel better. But he no longer felt anything even with music, something that was once his most intense passion. Only when he completely accepted this absence of passion could he discover a completely new way of relating to music, a way that didn't depend on emotional intensity, but on something more subtle and lasting. Kafka faced similar pressures from friends and family who didn't understand his introspective temperament and his tendency toward isolation. He learned that some soul journeys need to be made in solitude, without explanations or external approval. Emotional emptiness can also be a period of mourning for old versions of yourself. Maybe you spent years being the dramatic person in the group, or the always cheerful person, or the intensely passionate person. When these emotional characteristics disappear, you may feel like you're losing your identity. Who are you if you're no longer the person who felt everything so intensely? This is a terrifying and necessary question. Kafka explored this question when he wrote about metamorphosis. The most radical transformation isn't physical. It's the dissolution of the emotional identities we've built throughout life. When Gregor Samsa wakes up transformed into an insect, he's not just facing a bodily change. He's facing the complete dissolution of who he thought he was. Emotional emptiness is your own Kafkaesque metamorphosis. You're undoing yourself to remake yourself in a way you can't yet imagine. During periods of emotional numbness, you may discover aspects of yourself that were previously hidden under layers of reactivity. Maybe you'll discover you have a much sharper capacity for observation when you're not constantly reacting emotionally to what you see. Maybe you'll realize you can listen to people much more deeply when you're not projecting your own intensities into the conversation. Elena, a therapist who went through a period of emptiness after professional burnout, discovered that her ability to be present for her clients increased dramatically when she stopped trying to feel something specific during sessions. It was as if the numbness had removed a layer of emotional noise she didn't even know existed. Kafka had the same quality of detached observation. His characters are described with almost scientific precision, without obvious emotional judgments. This ability to see without emotional filters can be one of the most valuable gifts of the emptiness period. The relationship between emotional emptiness and creativity is complex and frequently misunderstood. Many believe that creativity depends on emotional intensity, that you need to feel something deeply to create something meaningful. But Kafka shows us the opposite. Some of his most powerful works emerged from states of apparent emotional emptiness. The metamorphosis wasn't written in a moment of creative passion, but during a period when he felt completely disconnected from his daily life. Emptiness can be the perfect space for something completely new to emerge, something that wouldn't be possible if you were busy feeling familiar emotions. It's like cleaning a room that was full of old things. Only after you remove everything can you see the real available space and imagine completely new ways to organize it. Your creativity may be waiting on the other side of the emptiness, in forms you can't yet anticipate. Emotional emptiness can also be an invitation to reconsider your relationships. When you're no longer operating from your habitual emotional reactions, you can see your relationships with disconcerting clarity. You may realize that some connections were based only on shared emotional dramas. Others may reveal a depth you never noticed before, a connection that exists independent of emotional fluctuations. Kafka had to navigate complex relationships during his periods of emotional alienation. His relationship with Felice Bauer was marked by this tension between his need for human connection and his inability to access conventional emotions of romantic love. But it was exactly this honesty about his emotional limitations that made his letters so deeply human and touching. When you stop trying to feel what you should feel in your relationships, you can begin to build connections based on something more solid than emotional intensity: mutual understanding, genuine presence, unconditional acceptance. There's also a spiritual dimension to emotional emptiness that's rarely recognized. Many mystical traditions speak of states of nothingness or emptiness as portals to transcendent experiences. What you're experiencing may be a Western and psychologized version of these spiritual states. Kafka, though not explicitly religious, had a deep spiritual sensitivity that manifested through his exploration of the absurd and inexplicable. He understood that sometimes it's necessary to empty yourself completely, to make space for something greater that cannot be rationally understood. His concept of infinite hope, but not for us, points to a transcendent reality that can only be accessed when we stop trying to grasp specific experiences. The emptiness you feel may be your soul making space for a form of consciousness that doesn't depend on emotional content to sustain itself. There's particular wisdom in learning to live with emotional uncertainty. Society conditions us to always know how we're feeling, to have quick answers when someone asks, "How are you?" But emotional emptiness forces you to answer honestly, "I don't know." And maybe not knowing is the wisest answer of all. Kafka cultivated this ability to live in uncertainty. His characters rarely have certainty about anything, and this uncertainty isn't presented as a problem to be solved, but as a fundamental condition of human existence. When you stop trying to resolve your emotional emptiness and begin to inhabit it, you develop a tolerance for ambiguity that can be extremely useful in all areas of life. You learn that not every experience needs to be categorized, understood, or transformed into something different. Time passes differently when you're not emotionally involved with it. You may discover that hours pass without you noticing, not because you're absorbed in some pleasurable activity, but because you simply exist without the need to mark time with emotional events. This is a very pure experience of presence, similar to what experienced meditators describe after years of practice. Kafka frequently wrote about this timeless quality of alienated experience. For him, moments of greatest disconnection were also moments when he felt most connected to something eternal. Perhaps emotional emptiness is an accidental form of meditation, a state where the mind finally stops producing constant emotional narratives and allows you to simply be, without agenda, without objective, without the need to feel something specific to justify your existence. It's important to distinguish between healthy emotional emptiness and clinical depression. Depression usually comes accompanied by negative thoughts about yourself, feelings of hopelessness, and a decrease in the ability to function day to day. Healthy emotional emptiness, though it may be disconcerting, doesn't necessarily include these elements. You may not feel much, but you can still take care of yourself, still find moments of beauty even if they don't touch you emotionally, still maintain hope even if that hope is more conceptual than emotional. Kafka distinguished between what he called creative despair and destructive depression. The first was a fertile space of questioning and possibility. The second was a closing of possibilities. If you're worried about which category your experience fits into, it may be helpful to seek professional support. But it's also important not to automatically pathologize states of consciousness that may be deeply transformative. Emotional emptiness can be especially challenging in a culture that values emotional intensity and productivity. We're bombarded with messages about the importance of being passionate about work, intensely grateful for life, deeply connected with our relationships. When you can't access these intensities, you may feel like you're failing to be adequately human. But Kafka reminds us that there may be deep wisdom in not conforming to society's emotional expectations. His refusal to be an enthusiastic employee, an emotionally available son, or a conventionally romantic lover wasn't a failure. It was a form of spiritual resistance. His alienation was a way to preserve something essential in himself that would be destroyed if he tried to fit into others' emotional expectations. During emotional emptiness, you can develop a very different form of compassion. Instead of emotional compassion that intensely identifies with others' suffering, you can develop a more spacious compassion that offers presence without absorbing others' pain. It's like the difference between jumping into turbulent water to save someone who's drowning and offering a firm rope from the safe shore. Both are valid ways to help, but the second requires a quality of emotional non-involvement that can only be developed through experiences like what you're living. Kafka demonstrated this quality in his relationships. Even when he couldn't offer emotional intensity, he offered consistent presence and brutal honesty that was often more valuable than dramatic emotional demonstrations. You know that moment, usually in the early morning hours when you wonder if you'll ever feel things like before, if those explosions of joy, that sadness that hurt so good, that passion that made your heart race, if all of that will return, or if you're condemned to this emotional flatland forever. If you've caught yourself asking these questions, if you've stayed awake wondering if you've forever lost your ability to feel deeply, write in the comments, "I miss feeling," because this nostalgia for your own emotions is one of the strangest and most universal experiences that exists. And when you share this, you're telling someone who might be going through the same thing that this experience of emotional loss is real, valid, and deeply human. Sometimes missing feeling is the first step toward discovering completely new ways of being present in life. The journey through emotional emptiness doesn't have a predefined script. For some people it might last weeks, for others, months or even years. There's no clear finish line where you can say, "Now I'm back to normal." Maybe because normal is exactly what needed to be questioned. Kafka never cured himself of his tendency toward emotional alienation. Instead, he learned to make it a source of insight and creativity. He transformed his inability to fit emotionally into the world into a unique capacity to see and express truths about the human condition that more normal people couldn't perceive. His difference wasn't a defect to be fixed, but a gift to be cultivated. Maybe your current experience isn't something to be overcome, but something to be integrated as a new way of navigating existence. When emotions eventually return, they may come in very different ways. Instead of overwhelming waves that dragged you along, they may arrive as respectful visitors you can choose to receive or not. Instead of completely defining your experience, they may be textures that enrich a background of peace you developed during the emptiness period. Many people report that, after going through periods of emotional numbness, they develop a much healthier relationship with their emotions. They don't become emotionally flat, but emotionally free. Free to feel without being dominated by feelings. Free to not feel without feeling broken. Kafka intuited this freedom when he wrote about characters who maintained their essential dignity, even in emotionally devastating situations. Emotional emptiness can also reveal the difference between happiness and well-being. Happiness is a temporary emotional state that comes and goes. Well-being is a quality of being that can exist independent of any specific emotion. When you can't access happiness but can still find moments of peace, beauty, or even subtle gratitude, you're touching this deeper quality of well-being. Kafka rarely described his characters as happy, but frequently showed them finding strange forms of dignity and even subtle joy amid impossible circumstances. This may be one of the most valuable lessons of emotional emptiness, discovering that you can be well even when you're not happy, that you can have a meaningful life even when you're not feeling constant intensities. There's something profoundly American about the pressure to always be doing great when someone asks how you are. We live in a culture that has turned emotional wellness into a product, happiness into an achievement, and feeling good into a moral obligation. When you're going through emotional emptiness, this cultural expectation can feel crushing. Everyone around you seems to be living their best life, posting about their gratitude practices, their mindfulness journeys, their breakthrough moments. Meanwhile, you're just trying to get through the day without feeling like you're faking your way through every interaction. But what if your emotional neutrality is actually a form of rebellion against this manufactured positivity? What if your inability to feel anything intense right now is your psyche's way of protecting you from a culture that demands emotional performance 24/7? The American dream itself is built on the idea that you should always be striving, always be passionate about something, always be emotionally invested in your future. But Kafka understood that sometimes the most profound growth comes from periods of complete non-striving, from moments when you stop trying to want anything at all. In his story, The Hunger Artist, the protagonist achieves a kind of transcendence through the complete absence of desire, even for food. Your emotional hunger strike might be serving a similar purpose. You're not broken because you can't muster enthusiasm for your career goals or excitement about your weekend plans. You're possibly experiencing what Kafka would call a necessary emptying, a clearing out of borrowed desires and manufactured wants. Social media makes emotional emptiness particularly challenging in contemporary American life. Every day you're bombarded with curated moments of other people's peak experiences. Vacation photos, celebration posts, inspirational quotes about living your best life, when you can barely feel anything about your own existence. Witnessing this parade of apparent emotional richness can make you feel like you're living on another planet. But here's what Kafka might say about social media. It's the modern equivalent of the bureaucratic systems he wrote about, designed to make you feel inadequate for not conforming to its requirements. Your inability to participate enthusiastically in the emotional marketplace of social media isn't a deficiency. It's clarity about the artificial nature of most digital emotional expression. The relationship between emotional emptiness and consumer culture is fascinating and rarely discussed. Think about how much of American commerce depends on your emotional reactions. Advertising works by making you feel something, then offering you a product to satisfy or amplify that feeling. When you're emotionally numb, you become immune to most marketing strategies. You walk through stores feeling nothing about the things that once excited you. You scroll past advertisements without the usual spark of desire or envy. In some ways, emotional emptiness is the ultimate consumer detox. You're experiencing life without the constant push and pull of manufactured wanting. Kafka would have appreciated this accidental freedom from the machinery of desire that drives capitalist culture. There's also something uniquely American about the belief that you can think your way out of any emotional state. We're raised on the idea that with enough therapy, enough self-help books, enough positive thinking, you can optimize your emotional experience. But emotional emptiness often resists all these interventions. You can't think your way out of feeling nothing. You can't gratitude journal your way back to emotional intensity. You can't mindfulness meditate yourself into caring again. This can be incredibly frustrating if you're used to treating your inner life like a problem to be solved. But Kafka suggests a different approach. What if this state isn't a problem requiring a solution, but a mystery requiring acceptance? The Protestant work ethic that underlies much of American culture creates a particular kind of guilt around emotional emptiness. If you're not passionate about your work, if you're not excited about your projects, if you're not emotionally invested in your productivity, you might feel like you're failing at the fundamental American obligation to be a high-achieving individual. But Kafka spent most of his working life feeling completely alienated from his job at the insurance company. He showed up, did the work, and felt nothing about it. Yet this very alienation created the space for him to write works of genius. Your emotional disengagement from the productivity culture might not be laziness or depression. It might be your soul's way of preserving energy for something more authentic. American individualism also creates unique challenges during periods of emotional emptiness. We're taught that we should be self-sufficient, emotionally independent, capable of generating our own happiness, when you can't feel much of anything. This cultural expectation can make you feel like you're failing at the basic task of being a successful individual. But Kafka's work suggests that the individual self is often an illusion, that our deepest experiences of being human come when we stop trying to maintain the fiction of being a coherent, emotionally consistent person. Your emptiness might be showing you the limits of the American myth of self-creation. The therapeutic culture of contemporary America often pathologizes states like emotional emptiness. There's always a syndrome, a disorder, a treatment protocol for feeling different from the cultural norm. But Kafka lived in a time before psychology had medicalized every variation in human experience. He understood his alienation as a philosophical and spiritual condition, not necessarily a medical problem. While therapy can certainly be helpful, especially if you're experiencing symptoms of clinical depression, there's also value in approaching your emotional emptiness, as Kafka did, as a doorway to deeper questions about the nature of existence, meaning, and authenticity. American optimism can be particularly challenging when you're going through emotional emptiness. The cultural mandate to look on the bright side, to choose happiness, to believe that everything happens for a reason, can feel insulting when you're experiencing the profound neutrality of feeling nothing. Kafka's approach was different. He didn't try to find the silver lining in suffering or alienation. He looked directly at the absurdity and meaninglessness of much of human experience without flinching. This wasn't pessimism. It was radical honesty. Your inability to put a positive spin on your emotional emptiness might be a form of intellectual integrity that your culture doesn't value, but your soul recognizes as truth. The American emphasis on extroversion and social connection can make emotional emptiness feel particularly isolating. When you can't access the feelings that usually fuel your relationships, when you can't muster enthusiasm for social events, when you feel like you're just going through the motions of human connection, you might worry that you're becoming antisocial or disconnected. But Kafka found that his periods of emotional withdrawal often led to deeper, more authentic connections. When you stop performing the emotions you think others want to see, you create space for more genuine interactions. The people who stay in your life during your emotional winter are often the ones worth keeping. There's something distinctly American about the belief that you can reinvent yourself at any moment, that you have unlimited capacity for personal transformation. But what happens when you lose interest in self-improvement, when you can't care about becoming a better version of yourself, when the whole project of personal development feels meaningless? Kafka might say that you've stumbled into a profound wisdom, the recognition that the self you've been trying to improve might be largely fictional. Your emotional emptiness could be clearing the space for a more authentic way of being that doesn't depend on constant self-optimization. The relationship between emotional emptiness and the American landscape is something Kafka would have found fascinating. There's something about the vastness of American geography, the long highways, the empty spaces between cities, that mirrors the internal landscape of emotional numbness. When you're driving through Nebraska or crossing the Nevada desert, feeling nothing, you might realize you've found the external equivalent of your internal state. The American landscape, with its capacity for both overwhelming beauty and crushing emptiness, offers a kind of validation for the emotional geography you're navigating. American spirituality often emphasizes feeling, whether it's feeling God's love, feeling gratitude, feeling connected to something larger than yourself. When you can't access these feelings, you might wonder if you've lost your spiritual capacity altogether. But Kafka's spirituality was often characterized by absence rather than presence, by questions rather than answers, by the recognition of something vast and unknowable that exists beyond human feeling. Your emotional emptiness might be bringing you closer to this more austere but perhaps more honest form of spiritual awareness. The American healthcare system's approach to mental health can be particularly challenging when you're experiencing emotional emptiness. There's often pressure to find a quick solution, to medicate your way back to feeling, to treat your emotional state as a problem that requires immediate intervention. While medication can certainly be helpful for clinical depression, emotional emptiness that isn't accompanied by other symptoms might be better understood as a natural phase of human development rather than a medical condition. Kafka never had access to modern psychiatry, which may have been a blessing. He was forced to understand his emotional alienation in philosophical and literary terms, which led to profound insights about the human condition. The American relationship with time can make emotional emptiness particularly difficult. We're a culture obsessed with efficiency, with making every moment count, with maximizing our potential. When you're going through a period of feeling nothing, time can feel wasted, days can seem pointless, and you might feel guilty about not using your time productively. But Kafka understood that some of the most important human experiences require a kind of temporal emptiness, a willingness to exist without purpose or direction. Your emotional numbness might be teaching you a different relationship with time, one that doesn't depend on constant achievement or emotional intensity. American materialism creates its own challenges during emotional emptiness. When you can't feel excited about acquiring new things, when shopping provides no emotional reward, when you lose interest in the consumer culture that surrounds you, you might feel like you're failing at a fundamental American activity. But this could be one of the greatest gifts of your current state. You're experiencing life without the constant pull of material desire. You're seeing through the illusion that buying things can provide lasting satisfaction. Kafka lived most of his life with very few possessions, and this material simplicity seemed to support rather than hinder his spiritual and creative development. If you've made it this far, you're probably going through your own journey through emotional emptiness, or you intimately know this experience of strange absence of feeling. You're not broken, you're not sick, you're not failing as a human being. You are, in Kafka's words, walking through a tunnel that has no visible end, but sometimes allows glimpses of a light that comes neither from behind nor from ahead, but from within. This channel exists to accompany people like you, who understand that the soul's most uncomfortable states often carry the deepest teachings. Subscribe to receive weekly reflections that honor your exact experience as it is, without rushing to fix it, without judgment about what you should be feeling. Together, we'll discover that emptiness can be the most fertile space for the birth of a more authentic version of who you really are. Because sometimes feeling nothing is the most honest and courageous response we can give to a world that demands constant emotional performances. Your experience matters, your emptiness has value, and your journey through it may be exactly what your soul was waiting for to finally meet itself.